Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with the travel guide and essential things you should know before traveling to Cuba. So if you want to know, then just stay tuned. Alright, let's get into this video. First off, let me tell you guys about Skillshare. I'm sure you heard me talking about Skillshare before. It's a really cool online platform created by creators and for creators with more than 25,000 classes of any skill set you'd like to learn or expand on. There is any class and subject available, from photography lessons to travel guides and tips, and also language lessons. I love how the platform basically makes you want to learn once you've become a member, because you have access to all classes of any kind. If you're interested in, for example, Spanish, you could explore that on Skillshare too, and also any other language you would be interested in. I'm sure you would find a class on Skillshare. You have like more than 25,000 classes to choose from. There's definitely gonna be a class for you. And this time I checked out the Spanish classes, which is this one, and I really liked it because it's a native Spanish speaker from Argentina, I think, and they're speaking, and basically you have to like repeat what they're saying, so it's really interactive and helpful. So join more than 7 million people in the community and check out Skillshare by clicking on the link down in the description box below and get 2 months completely free access on any class you'd like. So as you guys may know, I'm hosting my very first Spanish language retreat in Cuba next month in July. So I'm very excited for that, and I thought, why not give you guys a travel guide and tips to things you should know before traveling to Cuba. I've been wanting to do this for the longest time, like ever since I came back from the first trip to Cuba, because I think it's very important to know things beforehand. It's always good to have information before you go to a place. So that leads me to my very first point, which I think is the absolute most necessary out of all. Before going, you should really inform yourself about the country, inform yourself about the current situation, about history, about people, culture, whatever you can get your hands on. And basically I'm saying this because a lot of people, when it comes to Cuba, they have a lot of false information and mindset around the country. So I think that getting information, getting in-depth information, is the most important thing before traveling anywhere basically, but especially to a country like Cuba. In order to understand the political situation, you have to understand the history of the country. In order to understand the people and the culture, you have to absolutely understand the history on what the country has been going through. So what I love to do is talk to people. I talked to this Cuban classmate that I was lucky to have. He would tell me things about Cuba. He would tell me it's basically not like the media here portrays it to be. So I was really intrigued by that, because it's a Cuban coming from Cuba and he's studying here, and he's basically telling me everything is not as it seems, as you guys are seeing it on the media. Okay, so I want to know more and more, and of course I'm getting into conversations with him and asking questions. And another thing I would love to do in general is watch documentaries, but I don't watch travel documentaries because they're not real life basically. So the locals don't do touristy travel stuff. You could have the most beautiful beaches and everything. Most of the times it's not even the locals who go there, but it's only the tourists. So I really want to know about the local life. I wanted to know how Cubans live, how they get by from day to day, what they do, everything about their culture and about the living conditions. I really used to watch those documentaries about how an engineer earns $20 a month, how he gets by with that. So I want to know. So those type of documentaries I will watch, and because of that, I think that helped me a lot to see the realities of Cuba. It's not just oh, the picturesque places and cars and stuff like that, but I think it helped me to see okay, that's how people actually live. And those type of documentaries are really interesting, at least for me. So I really recommend you doing that beforehand, before going, because a lot of people don't have this vision about Cuba. So those kind of documentaries are very good for that. And I realized once I was there, there was nothing that surprised me. I don't want to say I knew everything about the country. Obviously I'm always going to learn more while I'm there with the people and everything, but I think that I was not thrown off guard by nothing. I kind of knew how the situation was, how people live there more or less, by watching those real life documentaries that helped me a lot to see the realities of the country. So to not be surprised, get in-depth information about the country. Alright, another essential tip that you don't want to miss is like definitely if you're an American, obviously you know that you can't go to Cuba without a visa. You need like to fall under one of now 11 categories as to why you're going to Cuba, and you can basically go just like as a normal tourist. But like for the rest, at least for like Europeans, we can go there practically without a visa, but we still need like a tourist card. I almost missed this information because what I did, I thought like, okay, like as a European you can just go, basically just how I go to Brazil without any visa or nothing, and I can stay there up to 3 months. But with Cuba it doesn't work like that. You need a tourist card, like even though it's not really technically a visa, but it's a tourist card like which grants you like the entrance into the country, and then they stamp it like once you go out again. So you have a tourist card for like 28 days or 30 days I think, and I almost missed getting that tourist card. So about 2 days like before flying, something told me, okay, go onto the website, like embassy website, German embassy or something, and look up Cuba. I looked up Cuba and it said I needed a tourist card, and I was like, what? I was starting to freak out because I thought it was a visa, and I'm like, okay, in 2 days in no way I'm gonna get a visa to Cuba. Turns out it's the tourist card, and you can get it at travel agencies, you can get it online. What I did was like I looked up a travel agency here in Paris, and it's a Cuban travel agency, so I went there directly. So you can go there and buy it directly. I bought it like for 28 euros. So I'm saying that for the Europeans, you might think you don't need a visa for Cuba. It's not a visa, but you still need a tourist card. So like get the tourist card beforehand. You can also get that at some airports, if I'm not mistaken. And another thing you absolutely need before going is travel insurance. But once I was there, to be honest, I didn't really care. Like no one asked me for like travel insurance. I had one obviously, but once you're there, nobody really asks you for it. They might ask you for it, so it just in any case you need to have travel insurance and a tourist card. Before you go into any country, I strongly advise you to learn a bit the language at least. And I really advise that for Cuba, because in Cuba you cannot, like, you could get by with a little bit of like English, like people know like the basics just because there are a lot of tourists, but they would say like, hey, how are you, or something like that, but beyond that they are not really able to communicate in English. So it's always good for you to learn their language, for you to learn Spanish. So once you're there, I think it's a lot easier like to get by with Spanish. Like even if you learn the basics, if you have like you could have like a little like guide or for the essential things to say and know, like ask your way or like ask for a taxi or something like that. I always think it's a good thing to speak like the local language, because people are connecting with you immediately, like way faster when you speak their language. I noticed that a lot. I met like other German girls, for example, when I was in Cuba, and they did not speak Spanish, and they did like half of the things I did, because basically from the first day or second day on I was there, we met a neighbor and we connected instantly because I spoke Spanish obviously, and my sister also speaks Spanish. So we were able to communicate with them and like do stuff and like go out and just like have like normal like friends in Cuba. And when you don't speak the language, you're not able to connect like on a deeper level with people. It's just like like maybe ask your way to some place or something like that, but you're not really like get to hang out and do stuff with them. Like we got to hang out and absolutely do normal Cuban stuff. They would like take us to like normal places, restaurants where the Cubans go, where like the Cubans go also like to party and stuff like that. So where they would take us to places where there were like no tourists basically. So they would do stuff with us that they usually do. We got to live like locals and do things like they do. That is why I'm hosting this retreat in Cuba. I don't see why you should not learn Spanish while you're there. So that's why I had this idea to do the retreats in the languages I'm traveling to, because I've never basically been to a place where I'm like completely lost and don't speak the language. And I think I'm always able to connect on a deeper level with the locals because I speak the language. It's like this quote that Nelson Mandela said. It says like, when you speak a man's language that he understands, it gets to his head or something, and when you speak his language, it gets to his heart or something like that, something along these lines. This is absolutely true. Another essential point is like, for people who love to plan things, I'm not really a type of person who likes to plan everything out like 100%, like, and not leave space for it to be like more flexible. I like to, of course, plan out my days and like have a plan of what I want to do, like more or less, but I always like to leave space and be like flexible, because I know, for example, if I meet people, they might have like a better option or like better ideas for things to do, and they might take me along to do something and see places I've not been able like to think of before. So I always like want to keep my itinerary like really flexible, and I think you should do that too while traveling. And even when traveling to a country like Cuba, obviously even traveling to countries like, for example, in Asia, also like in Africa, those are like a lot of countries there. I know it because I'm African, like a lot of things are slower, like slower pace. Like you cannot expect things to work like here in Europe or like in the States. So you always want to keep your schedule more or less flexible, because you know that you can't always like be like 100% tight, like have everything together. And there might also be like problems or like things or like the weather conditions or anything that you are beyond your control basically. So you always want to have like a fluid itinerary and just like go with the flow a little bit, like have your plan more or less, but like also go with the flow a little bit. And trust me, that will help you tremendously. Another important thing before going to Cuba is to know that Cuba has two currencies, and the first one is the CUP, the Cuban peso, is peso cubano, or the CUC, which is the convertible Cuban peso. And the CUP is basically the normal Cuban peso which Cubans use, and the CUC is basically the currency for the tourists. So you have one currency for the Cubans and one currency for the tourists. And let me tell you that Cuba is not a cheap country, at least not for the tourists. Like for the Cubans it might be cheap, like relatively, but for the tourists it's not at all. Like those are basically like European, like North American prices. One cook is basically the equivalent to $1, so it's very expensive. Things are in general expensive. You would like spend the same amount of money that you would spend like for a vacation in Europe, for example. You should know that before going. A lot of people think, oh, it's a Latin American country, so it's gonna be cheap, but no, it's not. Another tip I can give you as far as currency and money is, like, if you want to exchange your money as an American, it's best to exchange your money first into euros, because Cuba charges a 10% fee like off of American dollars, because they're penalized. So you want to change into euros first and then go to Cuba with euros. And it's best to always have like just cash. Like don't expect to have like ATMs there. Just take your cash and go there. Then when you exchange your money, exchange like just a fraction at the airport, because of course airport fees and commissions are always like the highest. Wherever I go to, I do that. I always like exchange a really tiny fraction of what I need, for example, just to get like a cab or like just to go to the city. And then once I'm in the city, I will find like another place where I can exchange the rest of my money. And I don't exchange everything at once, but I do it like maybe like every second day, third day or something like that, just along like when I see I need more, I exchange more. But I don't exchange everything at once and then you have to exchange it back and stuff like that. Don't do that. Like just like little by little, because in the city you're most likely gonna find like much better conversion rates. So do that. As far as accommodation, you have two options. You have hotels and you have as a second option casa particulares. What are casa particulares? Casa particulares are basically private owned homes and apartments that are for rental. Just like on Airbnb, regular Airbnb, like you can either rent an apartment for your own, or you can rent a room at someone's place, like living with a family. And in Cuba, that's absolutely the best way to go, because when you're living in an apartment, a private owned home, you help the Cubans who are renting their home basically, because they're working as like in a private sector. They're not working for the government, but you're helping them making a living, and you're also helping yourself basically, because you're connecting and interacting with Cubans. They're like the most adorable people when you live with them. A lot of times they offer like in-house breakfast. The host or someone, housekeeper, will prepare an optional breakfast every morning. So that's also the time to really get to know them and speak to them, and have like a totally a more like local inside of the country. Another essential tip I can give you before going there is that you choose an area that maybe this might sound like a little bit like crazy, I don't know, but a lot of people really like to stay like in the central areas, and the central areas are most of the times, like 99% of the times, there are like touristy areas, because locals don't really live in the center that much, like in any place, not even like here in Paris. Obviously you also want to like consider places that are maybe like a bit far off like the center, but they're more local and you get like more of a local experience. And when I stayed in Havana, I went to Centro Havana, which is not Old Havana. So Old Havana is like really like the old town of Havana, but that's also mostly where the tourists are. That's also where you don't get like as much of a local Cuban experience, because there's so many tourists like everywhere. So to get like a local feel, I always like to live in places where locals are most likely to live. So I did that in Rio de Janeiro. I lived in Copacabana obviously for the first time, but then after that I went on to other areas which are less known to tourists, where I really got a local feel of how the people live there. And the same thing I did in Cuba. So in Cuba you can go to Centro Havana, you can go to Vedado, which is a bit far off Old Havana, but it's really still even close enough to go there every day. So basically other places that are not just like old town or like downtown, right? Another thing which is very good to know before going to Cuba is that a lot of people get commissions on either like taking or bringing you to restaurants, getting you a cab, or like whatever service you need, and they won't tell you in the beginning. So it will just seem like, oh, they're so nice, but basically they're getting a commission for like taking you to a restaurant. For example, like the first day I was there with my family, we were like looking for a taxi or something, and then met someone who like on the street who just approached us. That's usually the way they do it, and they will approach you and ask you things, like you would have conversations with them, and then they ask you like randomly like, are you hungry? It's lunchtime, so we're like, yeah, we're hungry. We don't know of any place yet, so they're like, oh yeah, I know a really good restaurant right there down the corner, let me bring you there. So they'll walk you there obviously, but then once they walk you there, of course it's a restaurant that they get commission on, like for every customer they bring there. That you will have to have in mind for anything there, because it might seem like, oh, like people are so nice and friendly and giving their time like to walk us everywhere, but they're also getting a commission. So if you know that you don't want something like that, like you want to choose your own places you want to go to, then keep that in mind. You should like let them know beforehand. Even though you let them know, people are still very nice. All right, another essential tip is that you should consider, apart from like the regular transportations in Cuba, which are like taxis, which are the most common at least for tourists, and also the easiest ways to get around. Apart from that, you can also consider taking public transportations, the bus transportation, which is called Via Azul, and they have like a website with the cities and the schedules they drive to, and a lot of times they're like a fraction of what a taxi will take. And obviously taxis will take even more when you're a tourist. But apart from like the regular taxi, which is like a private car, basically a private driver, you can also consider taking like a taxi colectivo, when you're like, maybe let's say just two people or like by yourself even, you could take a colectivo, which means like basically a shared taxi, and that will also be much cheaper than a regular one. So a colectivo, or you could take Via Sur, the bus, which is a regular, normal, comfortable bus. Of course it takes a little bit longer a lot of times than a taxi, because they stop like at several like cities. The taxi is also a little bit more convenient because you can stop along the way. You could, for example, ask the cab driver to drive you like to a nearby beach or whatever, and usually they stay with you while you're there, and then they take you like to the destination you want to go. Or you could even rent one like for a whole day, like a private driver, and he would go with you wherever, and then like just stay with you there for the whole day, and I'll meet up with you again and then drive you back. So that's also a good option. You should ask around and not take the first price you get, but you should ask around to have more or less or an idea of how much the regular price is, and that like you can pay. Because if you don't do that, you're gonna get like ripped off a lot. That was it. Those were the essential tips I think you should know before going to Cuba. And once you know those tips, like, and things, information, you're gonna have a really great time. You're not gonna be caught off guard by nothing, because you already had your information before going there, and obviously you're always gonna learn more once you're there. I think it's also gonna open up your like vision more about the place, and for you to really be open and fully enjoy your experience. So if you guys want to know more about Cuba, my retreat there, then check my website out below. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.